Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin, Schall. Today, I will be rejoined by Howard Beck to continue talking about Paul George's potential impact on the Knicks and which Knicks could be traded down the road in a star trade. All that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, and today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. I wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because that would make you an everydayer. And I love my everydayers here on Locked On Knicks. So if you're not already, subscribe on YouTube, hit that notifications bell so you never miss an episode. And remember to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice as well. But who's shilling for a sub? I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. Today, I am joined by Howard Beck, one final time of GQ Sports, to continue talking about Paul George's potential impact on the Knicks. And then we get into a really interesting discussion on basically everyone in the Knicks rotation and how there's some overlap and who will ultimately be traded, to clarify that down the road and or in a star trade. So all that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
No, I agree. And look, if some people want to say, well, he's a little bit older, like, yeah, but you're not, you've already gotten, so I look at it this way. They were the fifth best team in the regular season. They beat the fourth best team in the playoffs, but I don't think on paper, talent wise, they're actually better than the Cavaliers. But you're somewhere in that range. You're 4 or 5, right? I think who knows what's going to happen in Philly. The Bucks have some free agency stuff to figure out, but I'm still kind of penciling in, Bucks, Celtics, Sixers as the top 3 teams in the East, and then Cavs, Knicks, 4 or 5 somewhere, whatever. All right, teams from that position don't generally make the finals, so. Is it internal evolution? Is it just, RJ Barrett takes a couple more steps, Quickley takes a couple more steps? I don't know. How much more like Brunson's already far exceeded expectations and projections, given that he was, obviously a second round pick originally. And even at the time that they signed him, like, you didn't expect this. How much more is there? And if you don't have it within, then you have to bring in somebody else. Paul George as a second piece, right? Is Paul George the prototypical 1A? No, he's kind of a 1B also. But you get enough 1Bs, you're in business. Is that enough to catapult you over those teams that are still ahead of them in the standings? Hard to say. Those teams are going to go through some things too, though, right? Like the Bucks have age issues. The Celtics have, I don't know what to describe the Celtics issues. The Celtics just have issues. Look, they're a couple, they're a few minutes or a quarter away or whatever from going to the finals again. But like, there's something a little off there. But you're in a position with the Knicks now where we're just good enough to be behind the top tier, and now we got to figure it out. Can we join the top tier? Are we a move away from getting there, or are we waiting for some of those teams to crack a little bit and then pounce later? Speaking of later, the longer term, I don't think Trae Young's on the block yet, but eventually he might be. Again, not necessarily the move for the Knicks, but I'm just, I was jotting down other stars who may be coming. I think the Embiid discussion is way too soon, but longer term, I guarantee you every team in the league has a board somewhere where they're keeping an eye on the Joel Embiid situation. If he's going to grow discontented at some point, you keep an eye on him, right? I would keep an eye on the Garland Mitchell situation in Cleveland. I don't know that that's the move I want to make because I've already got Jalen Brunson if I'm the Knicks, but I have my own personal doubts about whether Garland and Mitchell make sense long term, and I think that the Knicks, the way they crushed them in the playoffs, kind of pointed out some of, I think, the difficulty in being so over-indexed in your guards. And besides that, they're eventually going to have payroll issues there as well. And then the big ones. Everybody in the league is going to be keeping an eye on Giannis and Luka. Of course they are. Of course they are. Because the Bucks supporting cast has grown a little bit creaky, and because the Mavericks supporting cast is kind of non-existent.
It's gone.
And are they going to re-sign Kyrie? And is that a net plus or a net minus? I can't even tell you as we sit here in June. I don't think anybody should be getting their hopes up. I don't think anybody should be planning for it. I'm just saying that this is the way the league operates. Realistically, every GM in the league, every team in the league, somewhere on a board has Giannis and Luka somewhere in the distant future saying, let's just keep an eye on this. Because if things go south in any of those places, can we be in the running? Do we have the stuff? And on that note, by the way, for the Knicks, I'm never sure how to assess their trade capital. Because start with Randle. Everybody that in Knicks fandom and has a certain feeling about Randle, right?
Yes.
A polarizing guy. The highs are high and the lows are really low, and he can be a very frustrating player, but he's been all NBA twice. The whole rest of the league has seen the exact same thing that Knicks fans have seen, right? So the idea that he is the centerpiece of a trade for a superstar, I think, is a little far-fetched. Like, the contract isn't terrible, but it's not great either. Like 25, 27, 29 million over the next 3 years. Even with a growing salary cap, teams know all the same deficiencies there that the Knicks do. So I don't know that he's a great piece. And then Barrett's really, really good, but is he great? Is he ever going to be an all-star or a multiple-time all-star? Like, still unknown. And again, the contract's fine, but it's not some massive bargain. It's about what he should make. And so, like, who is the centerpiece of this superstar trade? The picks are all, like, they have a surplus of first-round picks, but most of them are either protected so that they're never going to be in the lottery, and or held, or are the picks belonging to teams that you probably don't expect to be high in the draft order anyway, for the foreseeable future. So, like, they've got picks, but I don't know if they're great picks, unless teams are counting on getting the Knicks picks and counting on the Knicks being bad enough for those picks to be good. So I just, like, yes, they have a surplus of picks. Yes, they have a lot of interesting players. Is that enough to combine for the superstar trade when the guy becomes available? I don't know, because it depends on who else is in the running, right? Yeah. Some other team, the Thunder still have 5,000 first-round picks and a bunch of really good players. The Pelicans still have those Laker picks and good players. Like, there are still teams out there that are going to be in the same lane trying to pry these guys loose. And I don't know if what the Knicks have, as good as they've been collectively, I don't know if any one of those individual players or collection of them is enough to equal the superstar trade. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think that's how Leon Rose has operated. And coming off of last season, when the Knicks were in the midst of the Donovan Mitchell negotiations, I don't think Leon Rose treated those young guys as what they've done so far, but more so how he projected them in the future. And I don't think this is a front office, for better or worse, that can ever be guilty of underselling their own guys. I think if anything, they maybe slightly overvalue their own guys. But honestly, I think that's a fine approach, because I think, to everything you're saying, the Knicks aren't looking to go all in on Bradley Beal. I would be surprised if they wanted to go all in on Karl Anthony Towns. I think they're content to just say, hey, we have these young guys. A lot of them, particularly Immanuel Quickley and Quentin Grimes, are two-way talents, and potentially really, really high-level two-way talents, playoff production aside, for Quickley in particular. And why not wait and see what those guys can become? Immanuel Quickley, when he was a starter last year, looked like someone who was maybe a notch below an all-star, right? 21-5-5 with elite defense at the guard position. Quentin Grimes, at the end of the regular season, post all-star game, shooting 45% from three on 8 attempts per 36 minutes, while playing, again, all NBA or close to it caliber defense. So there are reasons to talk yourself into those guys. RJ Barrett, I think, is an interesting case in particular, because I thought his regular season, like, it was almost under-discussed how bad it was and how disappointing it was. And then in the playoffs, he became a completely different guy, and all of a sudden was like, oh, wait, I have teammates. I can drive, I can draw two, I can kick out, I can get the defense in rotation, and that is my superpower, that I have this ability to get downhill no matter what. Respect my shot, don't respect my shot, doesn't matter. I'm getting into the lane, I'm drawing two guys, and if I'm willing, I actually am a pretty good passer. And if that continues for RJ, like, his ceiling changes, I think. But I guess my big picture question here, and we can wrap up on this, and maybe some quick thoughts on Quickley's potential extension. How do you think the Knicks prioritize these guys going forward? Because I've never really seen the fit between Randle and RJ. and Brunson, with all three of those guys being lefty, all three of those guys being ball dominant. I think in the playoffs, it got a little less clunky because of RJ being willing to pass. And in a world where Julius is healthy and shooting the ball like he did in the regular season, making quick decisions like he did in the regular season, you can maybe just find enough space and passing and collective savvy that it can work. But ultimately, with Mitchell Robinson like being camped out at the basket, like it feels like something has to give at a certain point. And at the guard position, it feels like something has to give at a certain point between Quickley wanting to be a starter and Grimes, I guess, with his size, nominally being a better fit next to Brunson, even if Quickley and Brunson lineups were fantastic. So, Howard, take this however you will, but like, what pieces do you think the Knicks are ultimately, not even for a star trade, but just in terms of clarifying their own rotation, are going to want to move off of? And which of those guys do you think, all right, ultimately going to be keepers? All right, guys, we'll be back with Howard in just a sec to continue our conversation on who could potentially be dealt off the Knicks and in what order should the Knicks prioritize those guys. But before we get into that, groceries, school shopping, and getting a little something for yourself. You know, you're already doing it, so why not get cash back for it with Ibotta? You can earn cash back on every shopping trip. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods. Either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It's that easy. The average Ibotta user earns $120 a year in real cash back. That could even cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. Or you could use your cash back to buy that flight you've been eyeing, that game you've been dying for, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. A typical basket of groceries is over $50 more expensive at the end of 2022 than the beginning of the year due to inflation. You could earn 2.5 times that in cash back from Ibotta, or even more depending on how you use Ibotta. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 off for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED. When you register, just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use code LOCKED. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKED.
Yeah, no, Gavin, it's a really interesting question. I think, look, let's just start with Randle for a minute. I think long-term, I think they're going to come to a point where eventually they're going to try to move him, right? If they're not already. Because even if you like what Randle does, and even if you want to just like think of him at his best, and at his best, you know, he's confident, he's aggressive, he's engaged and effective. He made All-NBA again. Like, that's no small thing. But is that the best way that you can spend? So this is the other thing. There's a certain amount of like, there's a finite resource when it comes to the way you spend your salary cap, right? Like, it's a soft cap. Yes, you can go beyond blah, 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 but it's hard. If you have $25 million invested annually, give or take, in RJ Barrett, 25 million, give or take, 20 to 25 million, give or take, invested in Jalen Brunson, 20 to 25 million invested, give or take, Julius Randle. It's actually 25 and going up, but where else are you going to go? You're not going to have another $25 million guy. And you're still a team that is a 25 to 35, $40 million guy short of being a championship contender. So think of it in those terms. Eventually, somebody who's making a good amount, 20, 25, 30, whatever in that range, someone needs to be out so that you can have a better version of that guy in. Without respect to position, without respect to anything else, I'm just saying in the abstract, that has to happen at some point. One of those big salaries has to go. And I don't know that Randle is going to long-term be able to live up to that contract or the responsibility that has been kind of placed on his shoulders. So I think Randle is the first one out eventually, except that another team, if you're trading for a star, another team's probably asking for, I shouldn't say that. I think it's a good chance a team is asking for Barrett over Randle based on age and based on potential and based on Randle's kind of, checkered track record, even though he's the more accomplished of the two. The Quickley question. Okay. So he's up for an extension. He could be a restricted free agent next summer if you don't extend him. He has shown potential as a starter. You outlined it all very well. I haven't checked in on this specific question with folks around the league recently, but as recently as mid-season, I think people around the league still saw Quickley as like exactly what he was: part-time starter, great sixth man, not full-time starter. Quickley himself probably doesn't believe that, because no player ever believes that about themselves, especially when you're that young. He turns 24 in a couple of days. I'm sure he believes and expects I'm going to be a full-time starter in this league at some point. And look at what I've done. Look at how much potential I've already shown and how far I've already come. He deserves to have that confidence and that expectation. But then you're going to want to get paid like that too. if Quickley comes in wanting an extension in the 20 to 25 range, and I just listed the other guys they've already got making, 25 plus, it gets tough really quick. You get locked in really quick. And that's what this new CBA is designed to do, by the way. It's designed to make you make tough choices. And so at some point you go, well, if I'm already spending, 100 plus on, Jalen Brunson, can I spend 100 plus on another guard, his backup? I don't think you can. And, so they're going to have to, I think, if it were me, I'd kick the can down the road. That comes with a cost too, potentially, by the way, because you can piss off players and agents by saying, we don't want to extend you right now. But I might kick the can down the road and say, this is something I want to discuss next offseason when you could be a restricted free agent, because listen, they do hold all the cards in that way. The Knicks, they've got that, you make the qualifying offer. He's restricted. If you want to keep him, and if you can find a way to do it and make it work with your cap, great. If you can't, there's always the potential to either preemptively do a sign and trade before he goes and signs an offer sheet, or if he does sign an offer sheet, you can always match and then try to trade him later. Again, there are restrictions on that, but I don't know that I want to tie up so much cap in the group I have now, given the contract commitments I already have made, knowing that this team is probably no better than middle of the playoff pack in the East. It's not good enough to make a championship run. I know everybody feels like, hey, listen, we were as competitive as anybody against the Miami Heat, and the Heat are the team that made the championship or made the finals. Yeah, I mean, fair, but the Heat were the most unusual, final seed we've seen, or finals, participant we've seen since the '99 Knicks. And I don't know that you should put much stock in we were this competitive against the Heat who made the finals, therefore we're right there. No, like the barometer in the East is still the Bucks, Sixers, and Celtics. And yes, I understand the Heat beat these teams, but the talent suggests that the teams that are above you in the standings are still the teams you're chasing. And by the way, even when I was listening to those top five earlier, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that if the Heat actually play the regular season the way that they should, and if they're healthy, injuries had a lot to do with where they were in the standings, but the Heat should be in there too. So the middle there is crowded, and you got teams that are coming too, right? Like, I don't know if the Pacers are ready to be right in the mix yet, but they were really good when Tyrese Halliburton was healthy, and they're going to make moves this summer, and they've got cap room. The Hawks have underachieved, but now they got Quinn Snyder from day one, and I think they will make moves this summer. I think the Raptors have underachieved and will be better. The Bulls are the Bulls, but I don't know what the Nets are going to do. I don't know if the Nets are going like up, down, or staying in place. But I just think that it's as the Knicks are looking up the standings to see who they're chasing and trying to catch, they got to also be looking at behind them, because some of those teams are coming.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how you measure yourself if you're the Knicks, right? And I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Like, you have to be honest about where you're at. And on one hand, post getting Josh Hart, I think they played, if I'm remembering correctly, a stat like a 57 or 58 win team. And that was, granted, small sample size. It was 20, 24 games ish against a decent schedule, not the hardest schedule in the league, but I think they had like the 8th toughest schedule in basketball post All-Star break. And then you look at what happened in the playoffs, and Josh Hart was extremely useful against the Cavs, not as useful against the Miami Heat, who dared him to make shots. And for the most part, he couldn't do it. And that kind of tanked some of those lineups. I think another important caveat is that Julius Randle obviously just got ankle surgery. If assuming you do keep him through the next year and you test that for one more season, like, you can kind of talk yourself into like, all right, like he was like, obviously he was terrible, particularly from an efficiency standpoint. But when he looked his best was game 5 against Cleveland, where it felt like that ankle was finally starting to get healthy. He had something like 13 points, 6 assists, 5 boards in the first half. Then he turned it again, was never the same. And that was sort of it. Immanuel Quickley was not ready for that level, or just having a bad 5-game stretch. And then he got hurt and he missed the final 4 games against the Heat. So if you're the Knicks, like, there's a world where, like, if you want to look at everything through maybe not rose, but orange and blue colored glasses, you could say like, all right, like fully healthy, everything's clicking. Like, we were a minute away, one Jalen Brunson pass getting through away from getting game 7 at home against the eventual NBA finalists. Or you could look at it from your perspective, Howard, where if the Bucks were there, like, the Knicks maybe win a game in that series. I thought that would have been a terrible matchup for the Knicks, as someone who was really, really high on how good they were last year. You could say, all right, is anything really going to change there next year? And I'm not sure what the answer there is. I think the only thing that I don't even know if there's a pushback, but I would argue for is I like whether you extend Immanuel Quickley or not, I would give him a real chance at starting next to Jalen Brunson next year. That was a lineup that was plus 13 during the regular season, played like far and away the best offense in basketball. I think it was 121 points per 100 possessions when those two were on the floor, played like one of the better defenses in basketball, like a top 5 defense when those two were on the court. In the playoffs, the defense was the best in the NBA. The offense was not as good because Quickley wasn't shooting as well. Again, super small sample size. But despite the heights of those two guys kind of screaming, maybe similar to what you're getting at with Garland and Mitchell, that's not super sustainable. I think Quickley is a good enough defender with a crazy long wingspan that if you're the Knicks and you're thinking about giving Quickley that money and thinking about locking that in as your backcourt, you should test that out, because even with the rising cap, I don't know if the Knicks want to go to the higher end of Quickley's projected value if, to your point, he's just a 6-man. We are going to be back one final time with Howard to discuss how the league is changing, why defense might not be quite as important anymore, and how that should influence the Knicks roster construction. First, I got to tell you about our guys over at PrizePicks. So how does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they go score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. It's no competing against other people, just you versus the projections available, and PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That includes the NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, men's college basketball, and so many more, all the way down to cricket and disc golf. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. They offer safe and fast withdrawals, and is currently operational over 30 states and, most importantly, Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, like, I don't know what, like, the recent history, not ancient history, but the recent history of backcourts who are like 6'3" and 6'1".
Yeah.
And what their success rate is in the playoffs.
Well, I was thinking, we did this on a pod, and I was talking about Dame and CJ, and I was like, all right, so that's the highest end. You get swept in the Western Conference Finals. And I think maybe the difference there is that Quickley is in a different echelon of defender, but you look at the last 15 NBA champs, 6'4" was the shortest of the tallest 2 starting guards with Jason Kidd and Dwayne Wade. And that was already like 13 years ago. So I hear you.
Also, by the way, 2 Hall of Famers. And Lillard and CJ, Lillard is, a top 75 all-time
absolutely
player. Yeah. So like Jalen Brunson's already exceeded his ceiling. It's not going to reach Damian Lillard levels.
Yeah.
And hey, Quickley might be a better player in the course of his career than CJ McCollum. But again, like, it's not. I think of like John Wall and Bradley Beal. So like, and these are ones that, by the way, as good as the Wizards were for a while with Beal Wall, all of us were talking at the time about, but there's probably a ceiling on that, and you're probably gonna have to break that up eventually.
And those guys are taller. I mean, if you're just looking at
taller,
height, yeah.
And they took way too long to break it up, and they took way too long in Portland to break up Dame and CJ. We all respected what they could do, but like, everybody kind of recognized there is a ceiling on it when you've got 2 guys who are smaller guards.
Howard, so, real quick though, is there an argument here that it can work if neither of those guys are your best player, though? Like, if you bring in the Paul George with those 2 guys, hypothetically.
Yeah. Okay. But then again, so Paul George is making 45 million and going up still.
You lose Randle and RJ maybe in this scenario. Like, they're cuts out. But I'm just saying, like, hypothetically, with that as your backcourt.
Yeah. Maybe. All right. So small backcourt with a lot of offensive pop, and as you point out, Quickley, a very good defender, and he's got some length and whatever. Like, maybe Quickley is a bigger defender than his height would suggest, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm arguing, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say that can work, and then you got a Paul George. I still think, you still have this issue with the 4 or 5 where one of those guys has to be an elite defender, and I know that Mitchell Robinson at his best has been phenomenal at times, but he's been so up and down and is hurt so often and still has some foul trouble issues. Like, he's so tantalizing and so frustrating. I don't know. I don't know if he should be the long-term investment there. So if you're going all in on a smaller backcourt, even if you get a great defensive wing, 2-way guy like Paul George, I think you're still one defensive big away from having enough defense to make up for some of your size issues in the backcourt. In the abstract, again, there's a lot of moving pieces here, but honestly, I'm wondering, after watching what the Nuggets did the other night. And granted, look, the Miami Heat, less firepower offensively than any finals team I've seen in a very long time. I haven't gone and looked to like make the comparison. So I'll just say off the top of my head, I can't remember the last time I saw a team with that little offensive dynamism actually make the finals. So the Nuggets defense looks better by comparison just because of who they were playing. But I am wondering, just as a thought exercise for the offseason, does the Nuggets winning with elite offense and defense in the regular season indicate that maybe we all have to reassess a little bit, that in this age of supercharged offenses where every year 2 or 3 teams are on a historic pace for the best offense ever, or one of the top 10 offenses ever, every year someone is setting new offensive efficiency marks or finishing in the top 10 of all time. Does that mean defense is even more important, or does it mean that in light of the Nuggets that maybe it's a little bit less important? And again, I'm not diminishing what the Nuggets did by any stretch or what they did defensively in the playoffs, but they were a middle of the pack at best defensive team. So while I'm sitting here fretting over what this, hypothetical version of the Knicks would be in the future with, over-indexing on scorers and wondering about their defense, I don't know. Maybe it's not as important now. I don't know. It's a thought exercise, as I say.
I think it's been a few years run. I'd have to go double check, but where you haven't had top 5 defenses in the finals, which used to be with the exception of that. I think it was, you would know better than me, but either 01 or 02 Lakers team that just didn't care during the regular season. Like generally a top 10 or maybe even a top 5 was a prerequisite.
I think it was always top 10-ish.
Yeah. And now it feels like a little less so. And I think even like the Knicks in some obviously are not a finals team, but a good example of it in like a team that was not a great regular season defense. And in the playoffs, like defended like one of the best modern defenses ever. And like, granted, some of it was probably the 2 teams that they played, but I think there's a world where with a really good defensive coach, which you could definitely still make an argument Tom Thibodeau is, like, you can turn it up a little bit come playoff time.
Perhaps. It's funny. This is not a shot at Tibbs, but Tibbs has got the defensive reputation, but his Knicks years and his Timberwolves years, those have not been top 10 defensive teams. So I'm not questioning his defensive chops, but I've always been one who's argued that, as we talk about coaches and the impact they can have, you gotta be careful. It's really about personnel in the end. And if you could have the greatest defensive schemes in the world, but if you've got Kevin Garnett in Boston, as he did when he was defensive coordinator up there, it works. If you've got Joakim Noah and Luol Deng and Taj Gibson in Chicago, it works. If you've got Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins, it doesn't. If you've got Jimmy Butler, then it starts to a little bit. Then when you don't have him, it doesn't work again. It's ultimately about personnel, and that's not just for Tibbs, that's for everybody. And he has not been able to manufacture elite defenses with the Timberwolves and Knicks without having elite defensive players. And that's for every coach. That's
first year on the Knicks, I think they were top 5, but I hear you since then. And last year post All-Star break, really. But it's a fair argument. And then that's, I think we can conclude on that, because that's kind of what's tricky about all this for the Knicks and teams in the Knicks position, where it's like, all right, how do you maintain the good parts of your team or how do you fix the bad parts while maintaining the good parts of your team? And we've talked about it with Mitchell Robinson, with Quickley. Like, all right, if you move off these guys for a star, it's like almost like a Jenga stack. Like, all right, that's great that you have this new piece up top, but you move that piece down low and the whole thing crumbles. So it's a hard thing, but Howard Beck, you do as good or better of a job than anyone else trying to figure it out. Before I let you go, can you just tell everyone one final time where they can find all your great work?
Yeah, of course. Writing for GQ Sports right now, so GQ.com. Obviously, I'm bouncing all around the Locked On Network. You can find me on Twitter at Howard Beck, and all of my written work from GQ, from Sports Illustrated, New York Times, everything else I've written for the last 20 years is on my Authory page, which is author with a Y on the end, authory.com/Howard Beck. Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Howard. I'm sure we'll have you back soon. If the Knicks do make a big trade, we can come back to litigate.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, but until next time, he's Howard. I'm Gavin. We will talk to you all soon on Locked On Knicks.